On the morning of August 24, 1992, the southern tip of Florida ceased to exist as anyone had known it. In less than 4 hours, Hurricane Andrew erased entire neighborhoods, destroyed more than 63,500 homes, and produced wind gusts that no measuring instrument survived long enough to record. It was not just the most destructive hurricane in Florida's history. It permanently changed how America builds, insures, and prepares for the worst. The system that would become Andrew emerged from the west coast of Africa on August 14, 1992, as a tropical wave, one of many born each summer from the seasonal conveyor belt of disturbances drifting off the Sahel into the Atlantic. It slipped into the ocean under blazing heat, carried westward by the mid-level trade winds, little more than a disorganized swirl of thunderstorms in a basin that had been notably quiet for nearly 2 years. The wave maintained a steady westward march, its low-level circulation gradually sharpening over warm water and high humidity. By August 16, it had organized enough for the National Hurricane Center to classify it as a tropical depression. Within 24 hours, it became a tropical storm and received the name that would go down in the history of American natural disasters. Almost immediately, Andrew ran headlong into strong westerly wind shear, the byproduct of a stubborn upper-level trough lingering over the central Atlantic. The hostile shear displaced the storm's thunderstorms well east of its center, leaving the low-level circulation partially exposed on satellite imagery. By August 20, reconnaissance aircraft measured a central pressure of 1015 millibars, a reading more suited to a calm summer afternoon than to a dangerous tropical cyclone. Forecasters at the National Hurricane Center quietly noted that Andrew might not even survive the week. Then the atmosphere changed. On August 21, a powerful subtropical ridge began building over the southeastern United States. As it expanded eastward over the Atlantic, the disruptive upper-level winds over Andrew collapsed. Vertical wind shear dropped to under 10 knots. The moisture-rich environment was now primed to feed deep convection directly into the storm's core. Andrew's response was immediate and explosive. Over the next 36 hours, the storm underwent one of the most dramatic rapid intensification events in the satellite era. Its eye contracted from approximately 35 miles across to barely 10. The eye wall transformed into a perfect unbroken ring of violent thunderstorms, their cloud tops overshooting the tropopause in a textbook display of a storm gathering its full strength. By the morning of August 23, Andrew was a Category 4 hurricane bearing down on the northwestern Bahamas. There was no wobbling, no sign of weakening, just an unrelenting march toward the southeast coast of Florida. Inside the National Hurricane Center in Coral Gables, computer forecast models had reached a rare consensus. Miami and the rest of South Florida lay directly in the storm's path. The subtropical ridge to the north was unyielding. There would be no curve to the north, no last-minute escape. Andrew was going to hit, and it was going to hit hard. Evacuation orders were issued for more than 1.1 million people across Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. U.S. Highway 1 was reversed to carry residents out of the Florida Keys. Florida's turnpike became a slow-moving river of headlights beneath a thickening overcast. Gas stations ran dry. Hardware stores emptied of plywood and shutters. Bottled water disappeared from shelves. The casual dismissals that had accompanied Andrew's early forecast track gave way to hurried preparations and a growing edge in every conversation. Through the evening of August 23, Andrew's outer bands swept into South Florida. Winds picked up and rain came in blinding sheets with each passing squall. As the night progressed, the air itself seemed to transform. Each rush of wind rattled loose debris and bent palm trees until their fronds nearly touched the ground. On Miami's radar screens, Andrew's compact 10-mile-wide eye edged relentlessly toward the coastline, its surrounding eye wall glowing a perfect crimson ring of violence. What radar screens could not show was what was happening inside that eye wall in the final hours before landfall. Air Force hurricane hunters made one last pass through the core and were buffeted by measured winds of 187 miles per hour at 10,000 feet, with gusts approaching 196. The storm was still intensifying as it approached land. Structural engineers would later estimate that Andrew's actual surface winds were underreported by as much as 20%, with localized gusts well over 200 miles per hour. One surviving instrument recorded an unofficial wind gust of 211 miles per hour before it too was destroyed. At 4:40 in the morning on August 24, 1992, Andrew made its first landfall on Elliott Key. Minutes later, the storm's northern eyewall, its most destructive quadrant, slammed into the Miami-Dade coastline near Homestead. Sustained winds over land were estimated at between 145 and 165 miles per hour. What followed was 4 hours of destruction at a scale that had no precedent in the modern history of American weather. The wind was not experienced as sound by those inside it. Survivors described it as pressure, something felt inside the chest and ribs, a physical vibration that shook walls, floors, and the air in people's lungs simultaneously. In Homestead, families huddled in bathrooms and closets and listened as kitchen appliances were thrown into walls before the walls themselves gave way. Mobile home parks were scoured to bare concrete slabs. Boats were thrown half a mile inland, wrapped around trees, or lodged into the remnants of houses. Homestead Air Force Base, once a sprawling military installation, was reduced in hours to twisted hangars, flattened barracks, and empty foundations. Post-storm analysis revealed something that meteorologists had not previously documented at this scale. Embedded within Andrew's eyewall were mesovortices, tiny tornado-like vortices spinning at up to 80 miles per hour, within the eyewall's already 120 mile per hour background flow. These mesovortices focused near 200 mile per hour forces onto specific structures, leaving adjacent buildings standing while completely erasing others. From aircraft, pilots traced the looping scars of these vortices across the landscape, thin boomerang-shaped ribbons of absolute destruction stitched into an already entirely flattened terrain. Despite winds of this magnitude, Andrew was in one respect a paradox. Its rapid forward speed of nearly 19 miles per hour meant that rainfall across most of South Florida was limited to 2 to 4 inches, with a localized peak of approximately 14 inches in western Miami-Dade County. The destruction that left South Florida unrecognizable came almost entirely from wind, not water. This made the event fundamentally different from the hurricane flooding events that had shaped Florida's prior experience with major storms, and it meant that the warning systems and preparedness frameworks built around storm surge had not prepared residents for what pure wind at this intensity could do to a modern metropolitan area. When the first gray light of morning revealed the scope of what Andrew had done, the view from the air was described by those who saw it as apocalyptic. From Coral Reef Drive south through Homestead and Florida City to near Key Largo, block after block had been erased. An Associated Press dispatch filed that morning captured it without elaboration. Homestead Air Force Base is gone. In Miami-Dade County alone, Andrew destroyed 25,524 homes and damaged 101,241 others. More than 99% of all mobile homes in South Dade County were completely destroyed. In Homestead specifically, 1167 of 1176 mobile homes were gone. Across Andrew's full path, more than 63,500 houses were destroyed and 124,000 damaged. An estimated 250,000 people were left homeless in a single morning. More than 1.3 million people lost electrical power, some for over 7 weeks. Entire communities lost telephone service and running water simultaneously. In the late August heat, with temperatures topping 90 degrees and humidity hanging like a wet shroud, the loss of power meant no air conditioning, no refrigeration, no way to preserve food, and no reliable means to communicate with the outside world. The death toll, given the scale of the destruction, was remarkably constrained. 15 people died in Florida from Andrew's direct impacts, with 29 additional deaths attributed indirectly to the storm in the months that followed. The relatively low direct death toll reflected the effectiveness of the evacuation. More than 1 million people had moved out of the storm's path before it arrived. Those who stayed, whether by choice or circumstance, faced conditions that the buildings around them had not been designed to survive. That last point would become the central finding of the investigations that followed. A Dade County grand jury examining the destruction concluded that a significant portion of Andrew's structural damage had not been caused by the storm's power alone. It had been caused by how the structures had been built. Roofs had been fastened with inadequate hardware. Garage doors, often the first breach in a home's envelope, had no wind resistance requirements. Concrete block walls lacked sufficient reinforcement. Inspections had been inconsistent. Materials had been substandard. Andrew's Wind had found these weaknesses systematically and exploited them. The grand jury's findings were not a technical observation. They were an indictment of an entire system that had allowed construction shortcuts to accumulate unchecked across one of the most hurricane-vulnerable coastlines in the world. Before Andrew, Florida had more than 400 separate local building codes in effect across the state, many of them outdated and poorly enforced. In the years that followed the storm, Miami-Dade and Broward counties enacted the toughest wind resistance standards in the nation, requiring hurricane straps, reinforced masonry, impact-rated glass or hurricane shutters, and significantly stricter inspection protocols. In 1998, the Florida legislature authorized the creation of a single statewide building code. In 2002, the Florida Building Commission implemented the modern unified standard that governs construction in the state today, mandating hurricane-specific reinforcements across all high-velocity wind zones. Homes built to this standard have consistently performed better in subsequent storms than their pre-Andrew counterparts. The lessons of that morning in August 1992 were, in the most literal sense, built into Florida's walls. The insurance industry absorbed a shock from which it has never fully recovered. Andrew's insured losses of $15 to $16 billion, the largest in American history at the time, bankrupted at least 16 insurance companies outright and forced dozens more to retreat from the Florida market entirely. The state responded by creating insurer of last resort mechanisms that eventually merged into Citizens Property Insurance Corporation, which still operates in that role today. The storm also forced the insurance industry to abandon primitive catastrophe modeling and adopt sophisticated risk assessment tools capable of estimating realistic worst-case scenarios for major urban hurricane strikes. The reforms stabilized the market in the short term, but the underlying vulnerability of insuring millions of structures on the most storm-exposed coastline in North America has continued to define Florida's insurance landscape for the 3 decades since. The federal emergency response to Andrew exposed a system that was not prepared for what it was facing. FEMA's initial coordination was slow and visibly inadequate. Local and state officials were quickly overwhelmed. The frustration boiled over publicly when Miami-Dade County Emergency Management Director Kate Hale delivered a televised address that was broadcast across the country. Her words, raw and direct, became one of the defining moments of the disaster. Within 24 hours of that broadcast, President George H.W. Bush ordered thousands of active-duty military personnel into the disaster zone. The 82nd Airborne Division arrived with tents, field kitchens, engineers, and medical teams, and the scale of the federal response shifted. The shortcomings exposed by Andrew directly influenced the restructuring of FEMA under the Clinton administration, which transformed the agency from a reactive bureaucracy into a proactive coordination body with pre-positioned resources and integrated state and local planning. The 1993 storm of the century. The following year would be the first major test of that new approach. Andrew's name was retired by the World Meteorological Organization in 1993. No future Atlantic storm will carry it. The hurricane remains the most destructive ever to strike Florida in terms of structures damaged or destroyed, and it held the record as the costliest Atlantic hurricane in American history, until Hurricane Katrina surpassed it in 2005. In 2002, a decade after the event, a reanalysis of Andrew's peak intensity led NOAA to formally upgrade its Florida landfall from Category 4 to Category 5. A reclassification that placed it among only 3 Category 5 hurricanes to have struck the continental United States at the time. 30 years after Andrew, its consequences remain embedded in Florida's physical and institutional landscape. Every building erected under the unified statewide code carries the imprint of what happened that morning. Every evacuation order issued in the state is shaped by what the failure to adequately warn and prepare for Andrew's landfall revealed. Every insurance policy written in Florida exists within a market that was fundamentally restructured by the losses of August 24, 1992. The storm lasted 4 hours over South Florida. Its consequences have lasted a generation.